Hello all, and thank you for joining me again. This is To The Point English. My name's Ben, and today we're going to be looking at the writing paper of the C2 Proficiency Cambridge exam, also known as the CPE. I'm going to be starting today by looking at the brass tacks, so the real practical important information, the facts of the exam that you need to know to be able to do this exam as well as possible. Then we're going to look a bit at the strategy, the best strategy to do, so the time management for each part of the exam. And then I'm going to look at the marking criteria, so what the examiners are really looking for and how they grade and mark each part of the exam. Okay, and maybe even Amy will give a contribution. I'm not so sure about that though. Okay, let's do this. In the writing paper for the C2 Proficiency exam, you will have an hour and a half to do 2 writing compositions. So there are 2 parts to this paper. The first part is obligatory, it's compulsory, it's an essay, and you'll have to write between 240 and 280 words. In the second part, you'll have a choice of compositions between a letter, a report, a review, and an article. And also maybe another essay. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. And in this part, you'll have to write between 280 and 320 words. So it's a little longer. But it's important to remember that each part of the exam is awarded the same number of points. So you have the same number of points to gain. There's 20 points in each part. Although the second part is longer, you have more words to write. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about time management. Now, the writing part of the exam is the only paper, apart from the reading and use of English, in which you need to worry about the time, because obviously the listening and the speaking, you're not in control of the time. But with the reading and use of English and the writing, you decide how you manage your time. Now, you have 2 options with the writing. The first option is to dedicate more time to part 2, because you need more words. Obviously, as I said, it's 280 to 320 words, whereas the first part is 240 to 280. So you think that's logical that you need a little bit more time for part 2. The second option, however, is to dedicate 50-50, 45 minutes for the part 1 and 45 minutes for part 2. And this is what I recommend, actually, because yes, part 2 is a little longer, but it's really only about 40 words more or less. It depends. I mean, it could be the same amount of words. 280 is the minimum and it's the maximum for part 1. Whatever, it's not a lot more words. And also, as I said, the points are the same. You get awarded the same points, or you have the same amount of points to be won. So for me, I think it's better to dedicate 45 minutes to each part. Having said that, it really depends on the individual, on each student. You need to practice as much as possible before you take the exam. So you find what's best for you. I'm a teacher, I have my opinion, my recommendations based on my experience, but everybody is different. If you feel more comfortable spending more time on one part than the other, that's fine. But you also have to think about the time management for each composition too. Because for me, preparation is extremely important. When I say preparation, I mean planning the writing exercise, planning the composition before you even start writing. So my recommendation is this: 15, 20, 10. So what do I mean by that? Well, 15 minutes planning, 20 minutes writing, and 10 minutes to check and review and correct any mistakes you've made. 15 minutes may seem a long time for planning, but the more time you spend on the planning, the less time you need to spend on the writing. Again, it depends on the individual. Each person is different, but that's my suggestion, that you at least 15 minutes on the planning, maybe even more, but practice and come up with the best time management for yourself. So now I thought it would be useful for you if we look at the marking criteria that the examiners use. First of all, it's important to know that the word length is a guidance. It's not strictly obligatory to write within the word length that they give. So between 240, 280, or 280, 320. If you write a little bit less, it's okay. If you write a little bit more, it's okay too. What they do specify is that if you write less, it may mean that you're not using a sufficient range of language, and then you're not including enough relevant information to express what you want to say. So you should try to get in within the word length that they suggest, but I wouldn't waste too much time counting every word. Maybe count the number of words on one line and then count the number of lines and do the maths. But yeah, it's important to know that it's not that strict. Also, they say if you write too many words, it could mean that you're including irrelevant information. So again, it depends on you, but obviously if you write 400 words, it's far too many. If you write 100 words, it's far too few. So get as close as you can to the word length. So how do the examiners assess these writing compositions? Well, they look at 4 particular criteria. They look at content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. So with the content, they're asking, has the candidate done what was asked of them? And that's really how they answered the question. A communicative approach is referring to the style and the register. When we say register, we're talking about if it's formal or informal. In the proficiency exam, it's very important to get the style and the register correct, spot on, really. Maybe in the first certificate and the advanced, you have a bit more flexibility, but this is proficiency, this is tough. With organization, they're checking that the composition is logically ordered, so it has some kind of flow and structure. Obviously, depending if it's a more formal composition or more informal, but it's relevant for both. So you need the logic and order. And in the language, they're looking at the vocabulary and grammar. And they're looking to see if you demonstrate a good range of language, a good range of vocabulary and grammar, and that is accurate. Again, that's very important. I spoke about this in another video when I was comparing the CAE with the CPE. The big difference is that in the proficiency exam, you need to be accurate. You need to use the correct vocabulary depending on the subject you're writing about. And the style that you're writing in, as I said, this register. So it's extremely important to be accurate. And what's the best way to prepare for this part of the exam? Well, you can probably guess what I'm going to say, but it's to practice, to do as many writing compositions as possible, and to really understand what they're asking for in the exam. In the future, I'm going to be making some more specific videos on the different parts of the writing, so how to write a report, a review, an article, etc. So subscribe if you haven't already, because you don't want to miss those videos, and I'll see you very soon in the next one. Okay, take care, bye.